Hello everyone and welcome to the iHub Summit 3 webinar series. My name is Marie Karakala, Areas Engagement and Program Coordinator. Today's session on Living Laboratories is the last of the 3 iHub webinar sessions that are taking place this week. Just before we get underway, if you do have any questions for any of the presenters today, please use the Q&A function that's located just at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible in the time permitting. So I'd now like to pass things over to AIRA's Chief Executive Officer and Chair of the Innovation Hub for Affordable Heating and Cooling, Tony Gleeson. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Marie, and welcome everyone. I think it's always important to remember that we have people right across Australia gathering here today to hear what the team's got to talk about. But on that, it's also time to take a moment and just consider where we actually all are sitting or meeting. And in that, the Innovation Hub would want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we meet today, the people from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, particularly those that are involved in this event. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and we recognise and celebrate the diversity of all the Aboriginal peoples. In addition, I'd like to move on and also recognise the contribution to what ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, has provided as part of this program. They've been a great supporter, not only in funding, but helping us to navigate this journey. So far, we're 2 years out of a 3-year project. We've completed 5 of the 7 milestones. And as we move into the final phases of the project, it's really good that these webinars are on now to see the real output. Initially, there was a lot of setup, a lot of development of getting projects off the ground, but now we're seeing the value of the work that's been put into place. And in particular today, we're going to hear from Queensland University of Technology, the University of Wollongong, but in the Living Labs, we've had other project partners, in particular the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre out of the University of Wollongong, as well other project participants in these Living Labs have been the Warringal, Bolton Clark, the Children's Hospital of Queensland, Synergo, Stencil Australia, planning, environment planning and sustainability departments of the ACT government. So a real combination of both academic, commercial and government getting together to really help us support and provide this innovative way of providing affordable heating and cooling. And of course, you can find out more about not only these projects and other projects from our website, and that's ihub.org.au, where we regularly keep our information updated. Well, that's enough for me. Enjoy today, and I'd like to hand over now to Aaron Liu from Queensland University. Aaron, over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Aaron Liu from Queensland University of Technology. Thank you, Tony, for the nice introduction. Here I'm going to give a brief introduction of our Living Labs of the iHub project. And then we'll be talking about Queensland Children's Hospital Living Lab and some updates about healthcare sector, especially the aged care sector, energy, data analysis and investment planning. Thank you. So first is our purpose is to validate the impact of renewable energy, energy efficiency and HVAC integration. Overall, we have 2 sector-wide living labs. That's one for healthcare and one for schools. And that's to quantify performance and national-wide benefits. And also in addition, we have 4 living labs across our eastern seaboard. That's schools at ACT and also Warringal Aged Care at New South Wales. Queensland Children's Hospital Living Lab, for which I'm the project manager. And Fernhill Residential Aged Care, that's a part of Bolton Clark. That's the largest not-for-profit aged care provider in Australia. And Dr. Sherif Zedan will be talking about it later on. Also, that Wendy is our project leader at QT side. And if more information is also needed, also welcome to contact Georgios, who is the leader at our Uni Wollongong partner. Thank you. Let's start. here's a picture of the Queensland Children's Hospital. It's quite near to the Brisbane CBD, just across the river. We can see that here is the chiller plant. In total, there are 6 chillers, as 5 of the big ones. It's about 3 megawatts each. And then another little one is about 1 megawatt. And we have tested the chiller system, digital twin, and optimization technology. And that technology is provided by a startup company based in Melbourne. It's Exergenics. So there was 3 steps involved. First is start with data collection. So we collected temperature, flow rates, pressure, and energy data, and the site equipment drawings and layout. That's a year of data. Then Exergenics built a digital twin model, and they used an advanced machine learning algorithm to train the data to build a working mathematical model of the physical plant. And after that, the chiller system optimization algorithm loops through millions of possible scenarios and identify the best way to control the system. And after all, that a set of implementable recommendations were recommended. And overall, from the ranking of the system, the current Queensland Children's Hospital has about 93 score out of 100. It's not bad, it's quite good in my opinion. But let's see what the 7 is. So here is a data fitting visualization. Is a coefficient of performance and loading, for example. And this vertical or Z-axis is a COP. And this axis is the loading percentage. I'm more an electrical engineer, not experienced in HVAC, but I'm quite curious to learn. And recently I learned that actually chillers don't work at the highest efficiency when it is 100% loaded. For example, we can see from this curve that the chillers are more likely to work quite at a very high efficiency when the loading is around 0.8 or 80%. That's from historical data we can tell. So 3 sets of recommendations were provided by Exergenics. The first is the chiller staging, and the second is dynamic condenser water temperature algorithm. The third is the chiller load balancing. And overall, we could see that 7% of energy could be saved, and 5% of kilowatt or kilo VA peak demand could be reduced. And what's the impact of this number here? So if we look at the annual savings, if we translate the percentage into annual saving, it's about 432 megawatt hour in a year. And if we make that into a dollar value, include the energy saving and peak demand saving, is more than $75,000 a year. And if we put it into a more like a transport sense, that's equivalent to take off 75 combustion engine cars off the road. And this technology is low risk because we could build up the engine or algorithm offsite based on data. It's very good application in terms of reducing HVAC impact or reducing energy. That's why we selected this technology. Okay, next one is, let's move on to the healthcare sector-wide update. That's, so here is more relevant to the residential aged care sector. I did some literature survey and a study into how it looks like in terms of aged care sector in Australia. And so here's the map of the aged care service, residential aged care service providers in Australia, and mapped onto our map. So in total, by the end of last financial year, we had about 2,695 sites and over 180,000 residents, and the whole sector employed over 235,000 people. That was a bit a kind of 5 years old statistic. The Bureau hasn't got new yet. And 70% of our residents actually live in the major cities. How can we do to support the service? And can we do in a way that we can reduce energy, reduce environmental impact? And also, can we remove the energy resources or the expense we spent in energy? Can we put it back into the healthcare side? So I suppose first step is that we need to understand how aged care use energy. And second is what are the low risk options? And of course, that's one question come up relevant to that is how do we size up our systems on site. So I have a dream, if you allow me to borrow a famous sentence, that I have a dream to put solar PV panels on every roof of residential aged care in Australia mainland. So the statement here maybe, or a question is, what if there are low-risk options to reduce aged care yearly energy bill by 40 million to 60 million a year? Let's see, is that possible? So I have done some data analysis. I'm a fan of data analysis, and I enjoy numbers and seeing numbers or analyze numbers. So here's how do residential aged care and seasonal demand profiles look like? Here's a kind of a box plot for Brisbane residential aged care community for 4 months, and I picked up kind of 1 month out of each season. It's 30 minutes, or I get it into 1 hour. It's just demand profile box plots by season. Please note that depends on the regional climates. For example, in tropical or subtropical areas, that we have more summer months. So actually, the 4 plots are not equally important, depending on regions and climates. We can see that tend to have a kind of a daytime peak, yeah, or morning peak in the winter, in terms of how we use electricity. Then how about the yearly demand profiles? If we got a year of data plotted, is this profile similar to a residential demand profile? Or is this profile more similar to a commercial demand profile? A residential profile, like for homes or neighborhoods, normally we may have a smaller morning peak. That's how, because after getting up, maybe we have a bit of cooking, a little bit of a shower, for example. And we may have a bit higher evening peak. It's due to cooking, entertainment, people coming home, for example. So this is, in my opinion, is more similar to a commercial profile. So a lot more energy and peak demand actually happen during daytime. Now another question is this profile similar to something else? Similar to a temperature profile with a bit time delay maybe? Similar to a solar radiation profile maybe, in terms of the shape of it? Let's look at other factors. So here's a factor, workday factor. Is it a factor for residential aged care energy use? So if we divide the days into non-work days and work days, this is peak demand, box plot, this maximum, minimum, mean, and kind of 75 percentile, 25 percentile. So this is non-work days, work days. Similarly, this is non-work days, and here's work days. This is for energy, daily energy use for the Brisbane community. There's no significant difference between the non-work days or work days for residential aged care communities. How about the weekdays or weekends? Would that be different? So if we plot similarly, but based on Sunday to Saturday, we also cannot identify a big difference across the days. But of course, if we understand how residential aged care operate and the demographics of it, we may understand why this happens. There's no significant difference in terms of operation for residential aged care over weekdays or weekends. So what's the impact? Day types don't matter much for residential aged care energy use and peak demand. But what does that mean when residential aged care consider low-risk on-site generation and the mature technology, such as rooftop PVs? So we would expect higher return on investment if we compare PV rooftop, for example, compared to office or commercial industry customers, or even residentials, because the energy use of residential aged care, the profile can be quite similar to the PV generation can be quite well matching with the load profile. And in my opinion, it's quite good cost control measure. That means we can spend less on energy and possibly more on the healthcare side. So next is Dr. Sherif Zedan for the Bolton Clark Fernhill Living Lab. Thank you.
So my name is Sherif Zedan. I'm the project manager for the Living Lab at Fernhill. It's an aged care building. It is a new building, just got occupied in October last year. and it has a range of different technologies that are installed in it already. So a lot of ESD features. So first, the building combines between natural ventilation and mechanical ventilation. It also has 3 chillers, chilled water system. Two of them can work for heating and cooling, and the aim is to basically use different stages for the use of the chillers depending on the load for the building. The building also has a BMS, so the building management system, and it controls HVAC, lighting, submetering, and provides a lot of data, and can also can raise alarms when something is not working correctly. The building has also PV, so there's a 100 kilowatt system, and a lot of other features such as energy efficient lighting, etc. We have done some studies on the whole building, but we are also focusing on 6 living lab rooms. So the 6 rooms on level 3, so that we can compare them to the identical rooms on the levels above and below. We have installed a range of sensors. So we have sensors for temperature, relative humidity, carbon dioxide, motion, and lux. We have also recently installed reed switches. So this is to tell us when the occupants or the residents of the room open their windows. We are doing a number of technologies. We are testing a number of technologies at the moment. So the first technology that I'm going to talk about is the digital twin. So Synergico helped us with building a digital twin for the HVAC plant. Digital twin is, in essence, it uses the real-time data from the BMS on site to train the model to be able to predict the performance in the future. And based on these predictions, you can actually save 40% of the energy saving based on automation optimization of the performance. So what we do, so this is a picture from the BMS. As you can see, we have all the data related to the chillers. So the 3 chillers, we have the in temperature and out temperature, we have the flow rates and everything we need. So all that data gets feeded into the model that Synergico built. So we used historical data, but at the same time, we're using actual data on a weekly basis. So each week, Synergico gets a bulk of weekly data that can keep training their model to build a better algorithm. Once that is done, the next stage, so we've already finished these stages, the model and monitor. The next stage will be using that data to predict the performance of the chiller and then try to optimize it to reduce the unnecessary energy consumption. This is an analysis from the model. So this is a representation of the actual chillers. So you can see, so this is here, the blue one is the COP, the green is the energy, and this is the in temperature, this is the out temperature. So you can see there are some spikes and drops in the COP. If you have a closer look, you can see, for example, here and here, there's a sudden drop in COP and of course, sudden rise in energy efficiency, and that is accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature as well. So these spikes shows that there is a possible misalignment between demand and control, and the digital twin will help smoothing these transitions to have better control algorithm, and will have possibly steadier COP so that we can reduce the energy or electricity that is being used unnecessarily. This is also a comparison between the actual performance and design performance of the chillers. So comparing it to the COP data we got from the manufacturer, we can see that this is at 20 degrees and this is at 30 degrees. So we can see there's a quite similarity between the actual, so the dots here are the actual, and the line, which is the design. But when we increase the temperature to 40, you can see a huge drop in the performance, the COP of the actual compared to the design. So this is one of the things that also having digital twin will help identify. Analysis of the deviation from, deviation of the actual from the design. You can see that the three chillers, from the three chillers, chiller 1 has the least deviation, so it's only 430 kilowatt hour, compared to chiller 2, which has the maximum around 8 megawatt, and then chiller 3. So chiller 2 and 3 are both responsible, and part of that probably is because they are responsible for heating and cooling. In total, it's around 14 megawatt hour. That's an excess of energy compared to the design. So that is technology 1. So as you see, we are still in stage 1 for that. And then we are also doing another analysis for the honeycomb blinds. So we installed honeycomb blinds in each of the 6 living lab rooms. We have different types installed in each room. And the plan is to have a short-term analysis and long-term analysis. So the short-term analysis is more or less done. So we have managed to finish a lot of it. And it basically focuses on baseline data, getting the U value of the glass with and without the blinds, and then simulating that. Long-term would actually be monitoring how the occupants operate the blind, because that will affect the performance of the blind. So we monitor the operability of the windows and the blinds, and the as well as the occupancy pattern of the room itself and the closing they have in the room, and that all these sort of things. And then all of that can also feed into a simulation model, which will see the effect of applying those blinds to the whole building. So we have gathered some data. So we have got the U value based on the heat flux and temperature sensors. And we found that the blinds on its own can increase the, can reduce the U value by 50%. So applying that to the whole building, we have created a model, simulation model for the building. And then we did a simulation one with the blind open, and then one with the blinds closed the whole time. And comparing that shows that you can actually reduce a lot of the electricity, especially in summer. And that's here for the cooling. So you can see also the cooling demand is reduced significantly when the blinds are closed. This is a comparison between the SHGC and U values with and without the blinds. And you can see the significant reduction, of course, of the SHGC throughout the year. And you can see also the reduction in heat gain through the windows during summer specifically. The analysis is based on when if the blinds are closed during daytime the whole time, which of course is unrealistic, and that's why we're having the next part, which will be trying to identify and monitor how the operation pattern works. But based on the assumption that the blinds are closed when there's sun, we found that we can reduce up to $10,000 worth of energy saving. So we still are working on stage 2 of each of the technologies. So stage 2 of technology 1, the digital twin, we will be working on the prediction. So based on the ongoing data that we keep getting. So we'll do that for about 4 or 5 months, so that we can train the model to a point that can help us find and optimize the operation of the plant. And then for technology 2, we are doing a qualitative data analysis. So we are doing interviews and we are doing some monitoring. So we installed some sensors that will tell us when the windows are being operated. And then once we do that, we'll be able to actually do a financial analysis of the impact of the blinds. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, and I will stop share and move to Clayton.
Okay, so hi, my name is Clayton McDowell. I'm the project manager for our Living Labs here at the University of Wollongong, and I'll be joined by my colleague Michael Tibbs, who's just sitting to my left at the moment, who's in charge of all our technology trials within the labs. So we have 3 labs that we're going to talk through today, the 2 schools in the ACT, shown in the centre on the left-hand side, and the Warrigal Aged Care Facility. For us, I just wanted to kick it off with kind of where we're sitting in terms of timing and our timeline. So we've gone through, and I'll speak a little bit about a REITSAF, which is about our KPIs and how we evaluate. We've installed a whole bunch of monitoring equipment, which we'll cover as well, and we've collected a baseline analysis. So right now where we are is we're at the stage where we're actually working with a few potential technology providers to trial these technologies, but we're actually still open as well. We have another 12 months essentially left of this project, and so there's lots of opportunities to still get involved and to trial different things if you have anything that you'd like to have evaluated and interested for. So just kicking off with the REITSAF, which is the acronym we use for what's called the Renewable Energy and Enabling Technology Service Evaluation Framework, which essentially is just a series of KPIs and a framework that enables us to be able to evaluate one technology to another and see exactly how it's actually performed within the facility that these living labs are trialling. So with a big focus and looking at these KPIs of how do we actually maximise the value of on-site renewable energy production, and a particular focus on HVAC, we've been on-site and grid renewable energy production, how those kind of align. So we are talking about some load shifting opportunities and how it affects the grid and so on and so forth. So just to really briefly look at some of these KPIs, we look at some things like the peak electricity demand and export, what are the consumption rates of this energy, as well as looking more broadly at sector benefits, so the energy cost, productivity, and some societal impacts, like how much avoided pollution we've had. On top of this, when we actually make a technology change, what we also want to be able to do is not make a negative impact on the indoor environmental quality. So we are measuring temperature and CO2, etc. And if anything, we'd like to improve those conditions. So on top of these KPIs, we have some separate ones surrounding those. But all this information can be found on the iHub website, as listed before. So this report, if you're more interested in the detail, you can jump on there or feel free to get in contact with our team. So what we're also doing is looking at not just the labs themselves, but how do these kind of apply to a sector-wide. Now, we've done an initial baseline, sector-wide baseline analysis using information that we've gathered from the ACT. We've since gone on a data gathering mission to try and gather as much information we can from every school across the country. We've had to then narrow that down to primary schools, but we now actually have interval data 15-30 minute for Victorian ACT primary schools. For Queensland and Tasmania, we've managed to get annual data for the schools there. New South Wales, we've still got some ongoing discussions there. We've got to go through a couple more hoops, but we're pretty positive we'll get the information for those schools as well. Unfortunately for Western Australia, there's actually no central database gathering energy data from a state side there, so we probably won't end up any data. We want to expand our initial education sector-wide analysis to actually cover as many of these areas as possible, so that when we actually look at these trial technologies, to actually consider how would this be rolled out to an Australia-wide and where these might be applicable. And sharing that with as many people involved within these sectors that are the decision makers, which is important for us. So just a real brief highlight here of some of the stuff that we've looked at for the ACT. So on the right hand side there, you can see a series of graphs from different schools. The red is actually the demand from the schools. The yellow down the bottom is the solar PV, and the blue is what we've got left over, subtracting the solar. But what you can see is, and quite obvious that, you know, just the timing of schools, that their energy consumption very much aligns with solar PV. So solar is a great way to be able to reduce the demand, and a lot of schools have quite a bit of roof space. We can still see with quite a few of the ones that were shown here that there's a peak in the demand earlier on in the day, really for winter heating in the ACT and trying to get those schools up to temperature. But it correlates really, really well. And sometimes in the afternoon, there's actually still a little bit of solar left over in some cases if we were to cover the sites with solar. So I'm going to just pass you across to my colleague Michael to actually go through the whole of life planning, and then I'll be back on to talk about the Warragul aged care facility in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton. We've been working on that transition to make it look like we're actually sharing the office face to face. So the whole of life planning framework, we're just wanting to offer this as an opportunity for decision makers, but also for technology providers as a framework to present innovative solutions that have benefit for the whole of life. They may be a little bit more expensive capital-wise, but bring a lot of benefit over the whole of life. So it's a decision planning framework that aims to improve the indoor learning environments for better education outcomes, so that we can select HVAC equipment that's fit for purpose, delivering best value for money for the whole integrated system for the whole of life. It's weighing up costs, benefits and risks. I'll just step through this quickly. That we asked some qualitative questions around the site and context with a future focus to give us a solid understanding of integration with the existing facility for forward-looking decisions on energy sources, gas, PV, not just the heating and cooling loads at the present, but into the future, and what's the thermal envelope and how the HVAC will fit in with that. Following on from that, indoor environment quality is really the core of what HVAC systems are delivering. So we just ask a series of questions. We know that temperature and CO2 are closely linked to educational performance. There's more research that needs to be done on this, but there's a clear link there. So ventilation is important. Increasing ventilation helps CO2 levels, which we'll present in the baseline data shortly. Good for COVID, but having excess ventilation throws heating and cooling energy down the drain, and not so good for bushfire smokes and pollens in the air. So smart control of temperature, CO2 and energy can give targeted performance of indoor environment quality without wasting energy. Fit for purpose, we're looking here really at durability, adaptability, integration with the whole system, and are we missing any opportunities for innovation that are really bringing in value for money? The sustainability questions is really core for this project in the iHub, where we're wanting to consider what we can do in this Living Laboratory technology trial phase now to achieve better renewable value. We then go on pulling this data together on a monetary assessment. We're looking at capital and operational costs, digging into the detail of maintenance schedules over the years, and energy bills with not just present tariffs but forecast tariffs over the whole of life with a future focus. Once we've got all this data, we just pull that together in a summary. Monetary and non-monetary data together just at our fingertips to make a decision. So going on to the ACT schools, Living Laboratories. We have two sites in this Living Laboratory. One is at Amaroo School, built in around 2004 to 2009. You can see it's a large school with around 2,000 students. There's a large 600 kilowatt PV array on the roof. It's actually owned by a third party that'll be handed over to the school ownership in 2035. But in the scheme of things, that's worth considering with a future focus of what can be utilised on site. They've also got a 20 kilowatt system on the admin building and a 5 kilowatt system on one of the other buildings that they own themselves, as well as a wind turbine. From this large school site, we can't monitor the whole site as a living laboratory, so we've picked two distinct areas. You can see on the left here the preschool area with two transportable buildings. There are so many transportables in schools around Australia, so there's an opportunity with a side-by-side comparison to do some technology trials there. with a matched pair. So we've instrumented those up in a bit more detail, as well as this building 8 up here. So that's a 2-storey solar passive design, concrete slab with large thermal mass. The heating for that building is in slab heating. Sorry, it's in slab heating with a gas boiler. The second school site that we've got at Fadden is a 1984 construction. There's a central boiler, the original central boiler for the site, with hydronic distribution through air handler units to each building. They've more recently put in evaporative coolers for summer comfort, with split system air conditioners in staff facilities that are not integrated into the BMS. The monitoring system that we've installed here is similar to what Sherif has mentioned. In our system, we've got a weather station, gas and electricity monitoring, temperature, humidity, CO2 monitoring, as well as collecting data from existing BMS. And that just goes live back to our remote database. The actual baseline data that we're collecting from this now, I'll go on to share that. So to help just focus our opportunities for technology providers to come in and trial equipment here. So for Amaroo, you can see the green is gas, the black bars and pie chart section is electricity. So you can see that winter gas heating dominates the energy consumption for this site. And it's very similar for Fadden. Going on to the daily electricity profiles, you can see the PV generation is a small fraction of what's of the consumption, but the loads, again, for these schools, as Clayton mentioned before, for the other schools, is very well matched to PV generation. Some of the REITs KPIs you can see here. That's interesting to note in particular. I just want to point out that the peak demand time in summer is around midday to 2 p.m. So it doesn't actually coincide with major grid peak events. So any work that we do on demand response may help to impact the site tariffs for the monthly peak demand, but not likely to have a large impact on the grid. The indoor environment quality results that we're seeing are quite interesting. This is our monitoring period was from September through to April for our baseline report, but we've picked out the coldest week in September just to get an idea. So across the bottom here, we've got each of the rooms, the monitored spaces, and on the y-axis is temperature, and you can see the temperature band's fairly wide, 25 down to 18 degrees for schools. And you can see even with those wide temperature bands, many of these rooms here in that cold week are spending 25% or more of the time during school hours below 18 degrees, which we know is going to be having an impact on, possibly on health, but certainly on education performance. The 3 rooms here were in a transportable that has intermittent use, and so this is unlikely to be so significant. In summer, for the same school in Amaroo, in the larger building 8, notice that the upstairs level rooms are all spending around 20-25% of their time above 25 degrees. And we know that anecdotally they've been complaining about this and been ready to install some air conditioning systems in those rooms just waiting on results from this data. So there are opportunities for summer cooling at Amaroo. Fadden, the temperatures for the cold week, a similar situation. The school takes a while to heat up in the morning, so there's a significant proportion of time spent below that fairly broad thermal comfort range. Looking at the time series data, the black lines here representing outdoor temperature, similar for Amaroo and Fadden. For Fadden on the right, the purple line indicates it's a transportable, and you can see there's quite a large daily temperature swing compared with the other rooms, which are more a brick construction. For Amaroo, you can see the buildings 13 and 14 are shown in the yellow and blue, and they can heat up quite quickly when the air conditioner is turned on in those transportable buildings, and they drop down quite a lot just overnight. Relatively speaking, the building 8 is very much more stable in temperature. You can see in the purple and the red lines here, but the disadvantage of that is that they take a long time, like half of the day, to actually get up to a reasonable, comfortable temperature. So thermal mass might not be such a good thing for schools. The Fadden Living Laboratory carbon dioxide, we found in the schools, as you could imagine, putting 30 kids into a room after lunch or even in the morning when you're trying to heat up the room, the CO2 levels get quite high, and that has an impact on education. So we wanted to keep a careful eye on that as we trial different technologies to improve that, or certainly not make it worse. There are opportunities for smart control in ventilation. That's a similar situation, even worse in Amaroo Living Laboratory, with many of the classrooms being well above the recommended levels of 800 to 1,000 parts per million for large parts of the day. So I'll just hand back over to Clayton, but I hope you can see that at the stage we're at, we're ready to trial technologies. We've got the data here, and I won't read through the things that I've already covered, but yeah, I just hope that helps you to think of what opportunities there may be. I'll hand back to Clayton. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I'll briefly finish up here with Warragul, and then we can move on to some questions. So with Warragul, it's a like 3-story building in total. It's got a fair bit of solar on the roof here that we can see on the left-hand image, 100 kilowatt peak provided there. The building itself was constructed in 2015, opened in 2017. A bit over 9,000 square metres there, with the 3 levels, 128 residential care home beds in total, as well as some service apartments. Our lab particularly focuses on level 2, which is 64 beds. So it's all residential care home. And now I just want to show you this image here. So this is all of the air conditioning equipment up on the roof space there. So it's a Mitsubishi Electric City Multi VRF system. But what is important with this is that there's 258 kilowatts rated electrical HVAC load of demand here, and it's demand response ready equipment already installed. Which we'll cover in a little bit, but it'll basically, what I'm highlighting here is that demand response is substantial for this site, and the opportunities are quite large. Especially there's a wholesale demand response mechanism that's actually coming online on October 24th this year, and this enables participation in the wholesale demand response market. So this is an opportunity that we're extremely excited at exploring, especially for this lab and more generally for how this could be rolled out for these sorts of facilities across the country. Similar to the schools, we have the exact same monitoring system that's installed within these buildings. The only thing that's missing off this is the window sensors. So we actually have window sensors scattered across the school as well as throughout the aged care facility. And those sensors are not just measuring when the windows are open, but also a temperature reading as well. So just looking at some of the energy breakdown, electricity is what dominates the energy consumption at the aged care facility, and this is largely because gas is only used for hot water heating, cooking and laundry services, so all of the heating and cooling demand is met by electricity through those already discussed. So we look at the daily electricity profile here. We can see it's relatively high and consistent, but different to some of the stuff that was presented by Aaron is we actually are seeing some of those peaks early in the morning and later in the afternoon. But there is potential here for that load shifting, as mentioned before. So especially in the afternoons there, maybe we can start to pre-cool the building a bit early to coincide with when the solar is still active and take advantage of some of those opportunities there. Looking at the indoor temperature, it's a lot more stable than what we observe in schools. So this facility is operating 24 hours a day, and it's a bit more. It's not like you're rushing hundreds of kids into classrooms and then taking them out for lunch. We've got people inside this facility for the vast majority of the time. What is interesting and quite different with aged care facilities, though, is this is their home. This is their own room, so they have the opportunities to open and close their windows and doors at their choice, as well as what the setting is on the air conditioning system. So we still do observe some rooms that might be a little cooler than others, but most of the time this is happening in the evenings, and it's by choice sometimes. So just looking a little bit more in detail with some of the temperature analysis, the black line down the bottom is the outdoor temperature, and we've chosen just a couple of rooms to highlight here. So the most comfortable room is that little orange band in the middle that has an extremely tight comfort band. The blue one that's above it has a bit more of a swing, that's at least comfortable. But in general, most of these rooms are kept within a reasonable comfort band for the vast majority of time. When we look at CO2, we also see that it's quite considerably lower than the schools, and as expected, because you don't have such a large occupancy changes throughout the building. But the CO2 levels do sometimes creep above what we would recommend, but most of the time this is happening during the evening, and this could be simply due because people aren't opening their actual doors to their rooms, which is where the actual fresh air is being delivered through the corridors. So there's a reduction there. But in short, the summary, the energy consumption in this facility is very much dominated by the electrical HVAC loads and vary obviously with daily and seasonal cycles. The site loads are actually coinciding with the grid peak events. So in summer, we're seeing this around 5 p.m. But we already have a demand response capacity that's actually demand control ready on this site. So it's a great opportunity to be able to get involved if this is kind of the area that your expertise is in. So we can actually show you how not only this facility, but how we'd actually be able to apply this sort of demand shifting across a much larger scale across the country. The thermal comfort is already well provided, so whatever demand shift we do, we want to be able to maintain that comfort. CO2 levels a little bit higher, but another opportunity for us to investigate there. So just to finish off is really this final slide to show a bit of our contact details, not just our own within our facilities, but also just to highlight again of Sherif's and Aaron's contact details. So there's still plenty of opportunity. We've got 12 months left. So if you do have something that you do think would like to be trialled within this and have the take advantage of all of the equipment and the data that we actually have and our expertise, we're more than happy to talk to you. So feel free to get in touch. And yeah, thank you very much. I think we'll move to questions, I guess, now.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Clayton and Michael, for the great presentation. I learned quite a lot for the school and our aged care sector. I have one 5-year-old or 6-year-old who is in school, so I am quite interested in your finding. But of course, that comes with 2 questions, please. First is maybe that I noted down my questions. That is, for example, for Michael, maybe, what are the reasons for why temperature fall below 18 degrees at our schools? Was that because building envelope, or was that because of heating and the power rating was not sufficient? You know, the heater was too small, or what was the main reason for the occurrence of quite a lot of times that temperature falling below 18 degrees Celsius. And
Yes.
actually, that when temperature fall below 18 degrees Celsius, it may create some other health concerns for senior people. Maybe this is, I don't want to mention too many of that things. So maybe Michael, do you know why that happened?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Good question. It's probably a lot colder down in Canberra than it is up in Brisbane too. So just overnight, because this is a school facility, it's not operating 24/7. So the buildings just get cold, and they just don't turn the systems on early enough. So it takes a while to warm up. So even at the start of school time, it's still not reached 18 degrees. In many of the rooms, not all. So Fadden was a lot better, but one of the particular things that I wanted to draw out in Amaroo, it was designed as a solar passive design, all the buzzwords, north facing, great solar access, automatic opening windows and thermal mass, which sounded great, but what it basically means is that it takes a long time to heat up in the morning. And then by the time you've heated it up in the afternoon, it gradually cools down through the afternoon and evening. And then the next morning, you really need to turn it on very early to gradually warm it up. So that's one of the key issues there in Amaroo.
Yep, and because it's for school, we don't really have occupants or residents overnight.
That's
so
right.
That even there's the residual heat, that's not of use. Even if we have a thermal mass, even if we have stored heat.
Yeah.
Right. I see.
So if I was building a school facility tomorrow, I'd have very low thermal mass and good insulation.
Yep, good insulation. Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe another question before. Please don't leave.
Okay.
Is there any opportunity for electrifying ACT schools gas use? Because I noticed the gas use can be quite a lot.
Yes. No. You notice, so the Fadden in particular has a nearly 40-year-old original gas boiler, and they're wanting to replace that, and they're wanting to use data from this Living Laboratory to just evaluate that change. So they're wanting an all-electric hydronic heating solution. So hopefully a heat pump solution. So if anyone's interested in trialing some innovative heat pump technologies, ground sourced heat pumps possibly, but certainly all electric solutions, we're very interested in trialing those. That's obviously a way to get value of renewable energy. You can't get value out of gas heater. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just adding to that, Aaron, as well. So there's the ACT government has a mandate to try and go to 100% renewable, and so electrifying a lot of these systems is obviously going to be a requirement over the years. So looking at some of these aging systems as they're kind of aging out, it's a perfect opportunity to start really nailing that issue.
Thank you. Wonderful. 100% renewable. Yeah.
I actually had a question about the same thing exactly, because it is quite interesting to have rooms that are below 18 degrees in your school. So what do the students and occupants of these rooms do for adaptive comfort? Do they wear heavier than usual when you are?
Yeah, actually one of the buildings was really interesting. We started monitoring one of the preschool buildings at Amaroo, and the system there was actually not performing correctly. There was basically 2 rooms, and one room was extremely warm. And whenever we attended the site, the students could essentially be in t-shirts, and they'd have the doors open to the facility. And you walk in there, if you're visibly warm. You walk into the next room, the doors are shut, everyone's got jumpers on, and the people are essentially freezing in that, even though it's the same facility. That's now been swapped out from a gas system to an electric heat pump. We're still gathering data to see whether what's been resolved in that sort of facility. But I personally grew up in the ACT myself, and we wear a lot of jumpers. So I grew up right next to Fadden in a school just nearby, so built in the exact same time period. So and that's what it was. You rug up, I guess.
So we have a question from Michael, who's asking, does the air-cooled VRF system perform efficiency in heating for the cold Canberra climate? and why was this a choice if not efficient?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of these decisions on installing this equipment, this wasn't made through our project itself. It's been made through the ACT Education Department over numerous years. And so we're monitoring existing equipment. So gas is very much dominating all of them. However, like as a trial, we're more than happy to trial different systems in this facility. And we have the option, for instance, Amaru as an example, to be able to switch off the in-slab heating in certain rooms and then bring in an alternative system so we can actually trial how efficient it is in the Canberra climate. It does get below zero there quite a bit. So some of the new CO2 systems and that are operating in lower temperatures, yeah, would see them as a, but the VRF was actually at the Warragul facility in Wollongong. It's based in Wollongong, not in the ACT. The CFP for that system was around 3.5. And in reference to your second question around monitoring clothing, at this stage we're not monitoring clothing of the occupants within our facilities, but we are looking at doing post-occupancy evaluation surveys at point in times before and after the trial technologies are installed. Is the electrical sufficient to support? Yeah, that's the second, the question around electrical infrastructure sufficient to support decarbonisation of heating at Amaru or Fadden. That's a very, very good question. Just adding to that question as well is the fact that in many instances, the actual electrical grid and the substations that are supplying energy to those schools is not sufficient to actually convert the whole thing across. So we need to actually really look at how do we actually couple it with the solar PV generation in these cases so that we're not trying to pull a whole bunch of extra energy off the grid. It's a great challenge, but it's something that they're very actively wanting to solve in the ACT, and I'm sure eventually that's going to trickle through the rest of the country as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Clayton. Look, that is all the questions that have come through the Q&A. So I think that leaves it as we might wrap up the Q&A session, everyone, which also brings us to the end of today's presentation. So I'd just like to thank each of you for registering and also attending today's webinar. And a special thank you to our presenters, Aaron, Sherif, Clayton, and also Michael for today's presentation. Today is the last of the iHub Summit 3 webinar series that were taking place this week. However, we will be hosting further iHub events in the coming months and we'll provide information to everyone on that hopefully very soon.